Western Australia stretches across ancient landscapes nobody talks about, where rock formations older than most life on Earth rise from rust-colored deserts, and pink lakes shimmer under endless skies. This is a coastline that runs for more than 12,000 kilometers, passing through terrain so varied it feels less like a single state and more like a continent folded into itself. Here, the land holds time differently. Stromatolites along the shore have been building their limestone structures for over 3 billion years, making them among the oldest living organisms on the planet. Forests of towering karri and tingle trees stand rooted in soil that predates the dinosaurs. Their canopies forming green cathedrals in valleys untouched by ice ages that reshaped other continents. The distances between settlements stretch beyond what most travelers expect. Towns separated by hundreds of kilometers give way to gorges carved by rivers that no longer flow, to salt flats that glow violet at dawn, to reef systems teeming with whale sharks just meters from shore. Each landscape exists as evidence of forces that have been shaping this corner of the world since before memory began. But the story of Western Australia is written in what remains visible and what lies beneath. From the weathered domes of the Bungle Bungles to the limestone pillars rising from golden sand, every formation carries the record of deep time waiting to be read. Our journey through these ancient landscapes begins where deep time meets modern life. As Perth rises along the banks of the Swan River. This isolated capital sits closer to Singapore than to Sydney. Separated from the rest of Australia by vast stretches of desert and scrubland. The city grew from a small colonial settlement into a sprawling metropolis that hugs the Indian Ocean coastline. Sunshine bathes these streets for more days each year than almost any other Australian city. Kings Park spreads across 400 hectares of bushland and manicured gardens on Mount Eliza. Walking paths wind through native eucalyptus forests that once covered this entire region. From elevated lookouts, the city skyline unfolds against a backdrop of blue water and distant hills. Wildflower season transforms the grounds into carpets of color, with species found nowhere else on Earth blooming between August and October. Fremantle sits at the mouth of the Swan River, where convict-built limestone buildings line streets weathered by salt air. The port town maintains its working-class character, despite the cafes and galleries that have moved into old warehouses. Fishing boats still unload their catch at dawn, while weekend markets fill Victorian-era halls with the noise of commerce. The Roundhouse Prison stands on a hill overlooking the harbor, a reminder of the settlement that took root here in 1829. Cotslow Beach draws crowds to its gentle waters and Norfolk Pine-lined shore, where families have gathered for generations beneath the same stretch of sky. Further north, Scarborough Beach offers a different energy, with rolling waves that attract surfers year-round and a beachfront that comes alive after dark. Both coastlines carry the same salt-touched air and the same westward view toward open ocean stretching unbroken to Africa. Beyond the city beaches, a short ferry ride from the mainland reveals a different Western Australia altogether. Rottnest Island sits 19 kilometers off the coast near Perth, a low-lying sanctuary of limestone and scrubland surrounded by waters so clear they seem to glow. Cars have never been permitted here. The silence that greets visitors belongs to a place where time moves at the pace of tides and cycling pedals. The island stretches roughly 11 kilometers from end to end, dotted with 63 beaches and 20 sheltered bays. Salt lakes pool in the interior, remnants of the island's formation when rising seas cut it off from the mainland some 7,000 years ago. Walking trails cross through coastal heath where banksias bloom and osprey nest in Norfolk pines bent by decades of ocean wind. Quokkas have made this island famous in recent years. Their small marsupial faces appearing in photographs shared around the world. These creatures exist almost nowhere else, having found refuge here away from mainland predators. They waddle through settlements and along bush tracks, unbothered by the visitors who crouch down to meet them. The island holds their future in its protected borders. A fragment of old Australia, preserved by accident and intention. Leaving the island's quokkas and quiet coves behind. The landscape softens as we travel south toward the Margaret River region. Here, the rust-colored outback gives way to something greener and gentler. Dense forests of karri trees rise from the earth, their pale trunks reaching 40 meters or more toward filtered sunlight. This corner of Western Australia feels like a different world entirely. The town of Margaret River sits quietly among rolling hills and farmland. Established in the 1850s, it grew slowly alongside timber workers and dairy farmers who cleared patches of bushland for their livelihoods. Today, the main street carries a relaxed atmosphere, where locals move between cafes and small shops without hurry. The pace matches the surrounding landscape, unhurried and rooted in place. Beyond the town center, the region unfolds in unexpected directions. Limestone caves hide beneath the surface, carved by underground rivers over millions of years. Coastal cliffs drop sharply to beaches where Indian Ocean swells roll in uninterrupted from distant horizons. The Margaret River itself winds through the valley, a modest waterway that gave its name to everything around it. In this stretch of Western Australia, the ancient forces that shaped the North continue their work in quieter, greener forms. Continuing through the karri forests that define this southern corner, the Walpole Wilderness holds one of Western Australia's most extraordinary stands of giants. This protected stretch of coastal wilderness covers more than 360,000 hectares of dense bushland and river valleys. Here, tingle trees have been growing for 400 years. Their massive trunks reaching widths that defy expectation. The forest floor stays cool and damp beneath canopies that filter southern sunlight into soft green shadows. The Valley of the Giants Treetop Walk offers passage through this cathedral of wood and leaves. A lightweight steel walkway rises 40 meters above the ground. Threading between the upper branches of red tingle trees found nowhere else on the planet. Each step brings visitors closer to a perspective usually reserved for birds and wind. The structure sways gently, designed to move with the forest rather than against it. Below the elevated path, the ancient empire boardwalk winds past veterans of the forest at ground level. Some tingle trees have hollowed bases large enough for several people to stand inside. Their heartwood consumed by slow centuries while the outer shell continues growing skyward. These trees began their lives when European ships had not yet found this coastline. Their roots drawing water from soil that remembers ice ages in distant lands. Walking among them means moving through living history that asks nothing more than stillness and attention. Beyond the towering tingle trees, the southern coastline reveals another ancient wonder, where granite meets turquoise waters and weathered boulders rise from the sand like a herd frozen in stone. Elephant Rocks stands within William Bay National Park, near the town of Denmark. These massive rounded formations have been shaped by wind and waves over millions of years. Their smooth gray surfaces and clustered arrangement give them the unmistakable appearance of elephants wading into the sea. The sheltered bay creates waters so calm and clear they appear almost tropical against the rugged southern coast. Families wade between the boulders where the ocean pools in protected shallows, warmed by summer sun. The contrast between the ancient granite giants and the gentle waters surrounding them draws visitors who find themselves returning to this stretch of coastline. Each boulder carries its own character, some leaning together as if in conversation, others standing apart in solitary contemplation. Morning light transforms the rocks from gray to gold, casting long shadows across sand that sparkles with quartz fragments. The surrounding bushland of peppermint trees and karri forest frames views that shift with the angle of the sun. This corner of Western Australia remains quieter than the northern beaches, known mostly to those who seek out places where the land itself becomes the attraction. Here, the patient work of geological time reveals itself in curves worn smooth by countless tides. Inland from the coast, the Wheatbelt region holds one of the most striking geological features shaped by deep time. Wave rock rises from the flat farmland near the small town of Hyden, roughly 340 kilometers east of Perth. This curved granite wall stretches 15 meters high and over 100 meters long. Its surface striped with bands of gray, ochre, and rust. The effect is so precise that standing at its base feels like facing a wave-frozen mid-break. The rock itself is part of a larger granite outcrop known as Hyden Rock, formed around 2.7 billion years ago. What visitors see today results from chemical weathering that has been working beneath the soil surface for millions of years. Rainwater carrying dissolved carbonates and iron oxides gradually ate away at the granite, creating the concave shape long before erosion exposed it to open air. The vertical color streaks come from minerals washing down the face over countless wet seasons. Walking along the base of wave rock, the scale of geological time becomes visible in every groove and stain. Nearby, other formations dot the landscape, including Hippo's Yawn, a rounded boulder split open like a mouth mid-yawn. The surrounding bushland holds wildflowers in spring and wildlife reserves, where the land continues its slow work of change. This corner of Western Australia stands as quiet proof that the most dramatic landscapes often emerge through patience rather than catastrophe. Returning toward the coast south of Perth, few places reveal the patience of deep time quite like Lake Clifton. South of Perth, tucked within Ningaloo National Park, this shallow coastal lake holds living structures that began forming when the pyramids were still thousands of years in the future. The Thrombolites here grow in silence along the eastern shore, their dark, rounded forms breaking the waterline like stones placed by careful hands. These are not rocks in the ordinary sense. Thrombolites are built by colonies of microorganisms, layering calcium carbonate grain by grain over centuries. The process moves so slowly that a structure the size of a fist may have taken 600 years to form. Walking the boardwalk that extends over the lake, visitors stand above some of the rarest living fossils on the planet. Only a handful of places worldwide still support their growth. The lake itself shifts with the seasons. Its water levels rising and falling with winter rains and summer evaporation. When conditions align, the Thrombolites sit partially exposed, their textured surfaces catching morning light. Pelicans drift across the shallows, while black swans trace paths between the formations. This quiet corner of Western Australia asks nothing of those who visit except stillness and attention to what has been growing here long before anyone arrived to witness it. From these living fossils near the coast, the ancient landscapes pull us deeper into the outback, where the goldfields give way to even more remote horizons. Menzies sits along the edge of this vastness, a small town that once roared with thousands of prospectors chasing fortune beneath red earth. Founded in 1894 during the gold rush, its population swelled to over 10,000 before the veins ran thin and most moved on. Today, fewer than 100 residents remain, guardians of a history written in abandoned mine shafts and sun-bleached timber. The town hall stands as a reminder of grander days. Its clock tower rising above streets that rarely see traffic. Heritage buildings line the main road, their facades preserved against the relentless outback sun. A quiet pride runs through this place, where those who stayed keep the stories alive for travelers passing through on the way to somewhere else. The cemeteries on the outskirts holds names of men who came from distant countries, drawn by whispers of gold buried in this unforgiving ground. Beyond the town limits, the landscape opens into Salt Lake country, where white crusts stretch toward flat horizons. Lake Ballard lies nearby, its surface dotted with sculptures that seem to belong to another world entirely. Menzies serves as the gateway to this emptiness, a last outpost before the land swallows everything human. In the silence of evening, when shadows grow long across the red dirt, the weight of isolation settles in like something you can almost touch. Far from the outback's silence, an archipelago scattered off Western Australia's southern coast holds a secret that defies simple explanation. Middle Island sits within the Recherche archipelago, accessible only by air or sea. Its dense eucalyptus forests hiding something extraordinary. Lake Hillier rests on the island's edge, a body of water that appears to have been filled with liquid bubblegum. The pink is not a trick of light or a fleeting seasonal phenomenon, but a permanent feature that has puzzled scientists for more than 2 centuries. From above, the contrast stops viewers mid-breath. The lake's vivid rose hue sits sandwiched between deep green vegetation and the endless blue of the Southern Ocean. A narrow strip of sand and paper barks separates the pink water from the salt water beyond, as though nature drew a line between two impossible neighbors. The color remains constant, whether seen at dawn or midday, whether scooped into a glass or spread across 600 meters of shoreline. The source of the pigment lies in microscopic life thriving in extreme conditions. Dunaliella, salina, algae, and halobacteria produce red and pink pigments as protection against the lake's intense salinity. These organisms have turned the water into something between a science experiment and a work of art. The lake has held its color since Matthew Flinders first documented it in 1803, and it shows no signs of fading from the ancient landscape it calls home. North of the city, those limestone pillars rising from golden sand find their home in Nambung National Park. This protected stretch of coastal wilderness sits where the Indian Ocean meets ancient dunes. The park covers more than 17,000 hectares of windswept terrain. Within its boundaries, one of Australia's most unusual geological formations waits in silence. The pinnacles stand scattered across the yellow sand like sentinels from another age. Thousands of weathered limestone columns rise from the desert floor, some reaching heights of 3.5 meters. Their shapes vary from jagged spires to rounded stumps worn smooth by wind and time. Scientists believe these formations began taking shape between 25 and 30,000 years ago, when calcium-rich sands cemented around plant roots that have long since decayed. Walking among these stone pillars at dawn or dusk reveals their true character. Long shadows stretch across rippled sand as light shifts from gold to amber. Kangaroos graze at the edges of the formation field, while emus pick their way between the columns. The silence here runs deep, broken only by wind moving through shapes that have stood watch over this coastline for millennia. Continuing up the coast where time writes in colors most places have forgotten, we find ourselves drawn to one of Western Australia's most surreal visions. Hutt Lagoon stretches along the coast near Port Gregory, its waters holding a secret that defies expectation. This is no ordinary salt lake. Here, the surface burns pink against the surrounding scrubland. A scene so vivid it appears painted rather than formed by nature. color comes from a microscopic algae called Dunaliella salinas, which produces beta-carotene as protection against the intense sunlight and high salinity. Depending on the season, the lagoon shifts through shades of soft rose to deep magenta. Its mood changing with cloud cover and time of day. The water sits shallow and still, mirroring the sky while holding its own impossible hue. Locals have watched these colors their whole lives, yet the sight never quite becomes ordinary. From the air, Hutt Lagoon reveals its full scale, stretching 14 kilometers alongside the Indian Ocean. The contrast between pink water and blue sea, separated by only a thin strip of land, creates a visual that belongs more to dreams than geography. Visitors often stand at the edges in silence, trying to reconcile what their eyes report with what their minds expect water to be. This is Western Australia at its most honest, a place where the land simply refuses to behave like anywhere else on Earth. Further north along this coastal route, Kalbarri National Park rises from the red earth along the Murchison River. The gorges here cut through rock that began forming over 400 million years ago. Bands of red and white sandstone stripe the cliff faces like layers of sediment frozen mid-sentence. This park spans nearly 183,000 hectares of coastal cliffs and inland gorges. The Kalbarri Skywalk, known by its Nanda name Kaju Yatka, extends out over the gorge with deliberate grace. Two steel and glass platforms reach beyond the cliff edge, suspended more than 100 meters above the riverbed below. The cantilevered walkways offer views that stretch across the Murchison River Gorge without a single barrier between visitor and horizon. Standing here, the scale of geological time becomes something felt rather than measured. Nature's window frames the landscape through an opening worn into a red sandstone formation. Wind and water spent millions of years carving this natural arch into existence. The window sits at the end of a loop trail that winds through low scrub and weathered rock. Through its opening, the Murchison River bends through the gorge in a view that has become one of the most recognized images of Western Australia. The Z-bend lookout reveals where the river changes direction in a sharp, zigzag pattern far below. A trail descends through narrow passages and over smooth rock surfaces worn by countless seasons. From the lookout, the gorge walls rise in stepped layers of color, each shade marking a different era of deposition. The silence here holds weight, broken only by the occasional call of a black-shouldered kite riding thermals above the canyon floor. The journey continues to one of the most striking chapters of this ancient record, where Shark Bay curves into waters, so clear they seem borrowed from another world. This protected marine area sits roughly 800 kilometers north of Perth, where the Indian Ocean meets land in shades of turquoise and white. Bay earned its World Heritage status not for a single feature, but for the way multiple natural wonders gather in one place. Here, seagrass meadows stretch across the seafloor, while dolphins swim close to shore and geological oddities line the beaches. Shell Beach presents one of the more unusual coastlines anywhere on the planet. For roughly 60 kilometers, the shore consists entirely of tiny white cockle shells, piled 10 meters deep in places. These shells belong to a species that thrives in the bay's hypersaline waters, where few predators survive to keep their numbers in check. Over thousands of years, the shells have accumulated and compacted into a surface solid enough to walk on. Early settlers once cut blocks from the compressed layers and used them to construct buildings in nearby towns. Further along the bay, the stromatolites of Hamelin Pool offer a window into life as it existed billions of years ago. These dome-shaped formations grow slowly in the shallow, salty water, built by cyanobacteria that trap sediment layer by layer. Scientists regard them as living fossils, descendants of organisms that first added oxygen to Earth's atmosphere. Walking the boardwalk above these structures feels like standing at the edge of deep time, where the quiet work of microscopic life continues as it has since the planet was young. North of Shark Bay, those reef systems teeming with life just meters from shore find their finest expression along the Ningaloo coast. This stretch of Western Australia holds one of the longest fringing reefs on the planet, running for nearly 300 kilometers along the Cape Range Peninsula. Unlike barrier reefs that sit far offshore, Ningaloo begins where the beach ends. Snorkelers wade in from sand and find themselves surrounded by coral gardens within minutes. The reef supports more than 500 species of fish and over 200 varieties of coral. Manta rays glide through deeper channels while sea turtles rest in shallower lagoons. Each year between March and July, whale sharks arrive to feed on spawning coral, drawing visitors who swim alongside the largest fish in the ocean. These gentle giants can stretch longer than a bus, yet they move with surprising grace through the warm waters. Turquoise Bay sits within the heart of this marine sanctuary, often called one of the most beautiful beaches in Australia. The water here lives up to its name, shifting between shades of blue and green so vivid they seem almost unreal. A drift snorkel carries swimmers along the southern end, where currents guide them past staghorn, coral, and schools of parrotfish. The sand beneath is fine and white, sloping gently into waters so clear that every detail of the seafloor remains visible from the surface. At the gateway to this underwater world sits Exmouth, where the coastline reaches toward the tip of the Northwest Cape. This remote town sits where the red outback meets turquoise waters in a collision of color few places can match. Founded in the 1960s to support a naval communications base, Exmouth has grown into a gateway for those seeking wilderness on both land and sea. The settlement remains small, home to fewer than 3,000 residents, yet it serves as the entry point to some of the most pristine natural terrain in Australia. Cape Range rises from the peninsula like a spine of ancient limestone. This rugged formation stretches for nearly 50 kilometers, its peaks reaching over 300 meters above the coastal plain. Deep gorges slice through the rock, carved by waters that flowed here millions of years ago when the climate told a different story. The range shelters creatures found nowhere else on the continent, from rare wallabies to blind cave-dwelling fish, that have evolved in total darkness beneath the surface. Charles Knife Canyon offers a window into this geological history. A winding road climbs to lookouts where the land falls away in sheer walls of layered stone. The colors shift through the day as sunlight moves across the formations, painting the rocks in shades of ochre and gold. Standing at the edge, silence feels absolute, broken only by wind moving through the scrub below. Off the coast near Exmouth, the SS Mildura rests beneath the waves. This cargo ship went down in 1907 after striking a reef. And today its remains have become a refuge for marine life. Coral encrusts the hull, while fish drift through spaces where crew once worked. The wreck serves as a reminder that these waters, beautiful as they appear, have claimed vessels for as long as ships have sailed this passage. Turning inland from the coast, few records written in stone speak louder than the gorges of Karijini National Park. Deep in the Pilbara region, the earth splits open into chasms carved over 2 billion years. Iron-rich rock glows in bands of red, orange, and purple, where ancient seabeds have been exposed to open air. This is geology laid bare, a place where visitors walk through passages older than any forest or mountain range on most continents. The gorges here drop suddenly from flat spinifex plains, their depths hidden until the final steps. Dale's gorge stretches for kilometers, its floor reached by metal stairways bolted into cliff faces. At the bottom, Fortescue Falls tumbles into pools cold enough to shock the breath away. Fern Pool sits nearby, a still green basin surrounded by walls that climb toward a narrow strip of sky. Hancock Gorge and Wiano Gorge offer passages that grow tighter as they descend. Spider walks between narrow walls lead to Kermit's Pool, where the rock closes in until only a thin corridor of water remains. These spaces demand attention to each foothold, each handhold pressed against stone that has been waiting here since the Archean Eon. The silence below the rim holds weight, broken only by water dripping from ledges and the echo of footsteps on wet rock. Emerging from Karijini's ancient gorges, the road north carries us into country where the land stretches flat and the sky grows impossibly wide. Here, along the Pilbara coast, 80-Mile Beach runs in an unbroken line of sand that seems to have no beginning and no end. The name itself tells only part of the story, as this shoreline actually extends for over 200 kilometers. Few places on Earth offer such emptiness, such quiet, such raw connection between tide and earth. The beach itself exists as something closer to wilderness than destination. Turquoise waters lap against sand, so fine it squeaks underfoot. During low tide, the ocean retreats hundreds of meters, leaving behind tidal flats that shimmer in the afternoon heat. Shells wash ashore by the thousands, some carried from reef systems far offshore, others deposited by currents that have traced these patterns for millennia. The horizon blurs where water meets sky, creating the illusion that the world simply fades away. Our coastline serves as critical habitat for migratory shorebirds, traveling ancient flyways between Siberia and the southern hemisphere. Flatback turtles nest along these sands between November and March, hauling themselves ashore under cover of darkness. The region remains sparsely visited, accessible only by unsealed roads that test both vehicle and patience. Those who make the journey find solitude measured not in hours but in the complete absence of human noise, where the only sounds are wind, waves, and the occasional cry of a passing tern. At the end of this vast coastal stretch, where the red earth of the Kimberley meets the Indian Ocean, Broome rises like a memory of pearl diving days and camel trains. This remote town sits more than 2,000 kilometers north of Perth, isolated by vast stretches of outback yet connected to the sea in ways that shaped its entire history. The air here carries salt and heat in equal measure, and the land glows orange against waters that shift from turquoise to deep blue. Cable Beach stretches for 22 kilometers along the edge of town. It's white sand meeting the ocean in a line so clean it appears drawn by hand. Named for the telegraph cable laid between Broome and Java in 1889, this beach has become synonymous with sunsets that paint the sky in shades of fire. Camels walk in silhouette against the fading light, their riders watching the sun sink into the Indian Ocean. The tides here move dramatically, exposing vast flats at low water and returning hours later to lap at the dunes. South of town, Ganthiam Point rises in layers of red rock, sculpted by millions of years of wind and wave. At low tide, dinosaur footprints emerge from the stone, pressed into the earth 130 million years ago by creatures that once walked this ancient shore. The cliffs glow brightest at sunset, their iron-rich surfaces catching the last light and burning against the darkening sea. From this headland, coastline reveals itself as something older than human memory, carved and worn into shapes that hold the weight of deep time. Beyond Broome's famous sunsets, the ancient coastline continues northward to a place where red cliffs plunge into turquoise waters with dramatic force. James Price Point rises from the Dampier Peninsula, roughly 60 kilometers north of Broome, where the Pindan Earth meets the Indian Ocean in a collision of color. This remote headland belongs to the Gularabulu people, who have walked these shores for tens of thousands of years. Their songlines crisscross this country, mapping sacred sites and seasonal movements along pathways invisible to untrained eyes. The cliffs here glow brightest at sunset, when the iron-rich soil catches the falling light and burns orange against the deepening blue of sea and sky. Dinosaur footprints press into the coastal rock platforms below. Preserved tracks from creatures that wandered this shoreline over 130 million years ago. These prints emerge at low tide, scattered across the reef like messages left between geological ages. Walking among them feels less like visiting a museum, and more like stepping through a door left slightly open. Beyond the cliffs, the landscape stretches into sparse woodland, where bob trees stand like sentinels with swollen trunks. The silence here runs deep, broken only by waves working against stone, and the occasional call of sea eagles riding thermal currents overhead. Few travelers make the journey along the unsealed road from Broome, which means the headland often sits empty beneath its wide sky. This isolation preserves something increasingly rare along the Australian coast: a sense of standing at the edge of mapped territory, where the land still keeps most of its secrets. Inland from the coast, the Bungle Bungle Range rises from the Kimberley. like something pulled from another world entirely. The Purnululu National Park shelters these striped domes in a remote corner of Western Australia that remained unknown to most outsiders until 1983. Aboriginal people have walked this land for over 20,000 years, reading stories in stone that newcomers are only beginning to understand. The beehive formations stand clustered across the landscape. Their orange and gray bands, created by differences in clay content and porosity, built up over 350 million years. Silica-rich layers resist erosion, while softer bands host dark cyanobacteria, painting each dome with horizontal stripes. Walking between them feels less like hiking and more like moving through the architecture of geological time made visible. Cathedral Gorge opens into a natural amphitheater, where sandstone walls curve upward into shadow and light plays across surfaces worn smooth by ancient waters. Echidna Chasm narrows to passages barely wide enough for a single person, with walls stretching nearly 200 meters overhead. The wet season transforms dry creek beds into flowing waterways, and the Kimberley sun sets these formations glowing amber against skies that hold more stars than most people ever witness in a lifetime. From the striped domes of Purnululu to every horizon crossed along the way, the ancient landscapes of Western Australia hold something that stays with those who travel through them. From the stromatolites of Shark Bay to the striped domes of Purnululu, this corner of the world carries the weight of deep time in every formation and shoreline. The pink waters of Lake Hillier, the silence of Lake Ballard, the gorges of Karijini. Each place exists as evidence of forces that have been shaping this land since before memory began. Click on the video that's appearing now to continue your journey of the wonders of the world.